has had the worst reading scores in 30 years, worst math scores in 30 years. And we're talking about bathrooms, locker rooms. We have failed the American people, and they're pissed off. And guess what? They earn the right to be pissed off at all of us.
Home from Japan, where he served as ambassador under the Biden administration, Rahm Emanuel is back in the public eye, offering his blunt assessment of where Democrats went wrong last year to just about anyone who will listen. Well, while his style isn't anything new, certainly not to us, comments by the former mayor of Chicago have piqued the interest of political watchers, wondering what he might be gunning for next. Will it be U.S. Senate, maybe governor of Illinois, or even a return to City Hall? Take a listen to what Emanuel himself said earlier this month.
It's a straight question. Would you consider running again for the mayor?
I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I'm not done with public service, and I'm hoping public service is not done with me. So I love it. I know it's hard for you to believe, or it's hard for me to believe. I've been back 5 weeks, but I'm going to take some time to think about it. But public service is in my future. I just don't know where.
So it's not a no?
Well, it's not a yes either.
Emanuel previously served in Congress and as White House Chief of Staff, among a slew of other top jobs within the Democratic Party. He decided not to run for a third term as mayor in 2019, facing widespread criticism over his handling of the police killing of teen Laquan McDonald. But my next guest says Rahm could have his eye on the ultimate political prize. Yeah, President of the United States. Jonathan Martin is the Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist at Politico, joining me this morning to talk more about what could be next. John, it's been a while. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Happy early St. Patrick's Day.
And to you as well. You open your article, which is getting a lot of attention, by saying Rahm wants to run for the presidency. But as you heard in his comments, he can be evasive about this. Look, we also have a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois opening up, governor of Illinois opening up. You got J.B. Pritzker in the mix. What makes you think that presidency is where he's going?
Because he's voting with his fate. He's taking a national schedule, talking about national issues, and I think his ultimate interest is in one last ride in some kind of a national capacity. Now, you and I know that everybody who runs for president isn't necessarily going to wind up as president, and some of them even know that when they do it. So the question I have is, when Rahm actually sits down next year and decides, is he going to have a better shot landing as Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense for having run for president? Or is he more inclined to get those jobs if he doesn't run for president and gets behind somebody else who's running? I think that's going to be a huge driver in his ultimate decision. What helps him get that final big last job in public service?
You know, it's interesting. As you listen to him, you write that he's sort of crafting a stump speech. It may be that. And he says, I'm done with locker room talk, no bathroom talk. Let's talk about the classroom. But what he's saying is going against what some would call a woke or more liberal progressive agenda. Does that put him in trouble with a progressive base that he once owned?
I'm not sure that liberals could hate Rahm Emanuel anymore. I just think, mathematically that's simply not possible. Look, he's despised by the left. I don't think that's going to change because he wants the party to move on from talking about trans issues and teenagers. I think his larger challenge would be, could he actually assemble a coalition of folks in the center and even the center left to put together a campaign for president when he's going to be closer to 70 than 60 and reflects an earlier era in the Democratic Party going back to Clinton and Obama. I think that's more of a challenge than his not being liked by the left. That's nothing new. But you mentioned his stump speech. Look, he's a very talented political strategist. He worked in politics, as you know, before he got into elective office. And I think he understands that there's an appetite, there's an opening right now in the Democratic Party to sort of run toward the center. Democrats desperately want to win. And if ever there was an opening for a Rahm Emanuel, I think it's now, because the party's sick of losing and it wants to get back the White House. And I think when the party is desperate, it's more open to take a risk on folks who typically would be seen as outsiders. Jimmy Carter, 76, Bill Clinton, 92, Barack Obama, 08. I'm not saying it's going to be Rahm Emanuel in 2024. I'm sorry, 2028 rather. But if ever there was a moment, it's now.
And as you know, you're talking to Chicagoland primarily right now, and we know Rahm better than most of the audiences around the country, perhaps at least right now. You write that he can come off sometimes more as the tactician than the politician he is. He can be gruff, he can be dismissive. We know his personality here. I'm sort of curious, in the age of Trump, which we're in, does that dismissive, gruff personality do we kind of accept it more than we might have years ago?
It's a really good insight. Could the kind of brusque Chicago, one sentence and hang up the phone type figure, could that person, actually cut ice in a national political campaign? And I think 30 years ago, the answer is of course not. But could that translate in 2028 in the TikTok era, where the person that can break through in a 7-second clip is a lot more formidable figure than the person who wants to give a windy 45-minute speech? Again, I come back to what I was saying. It doesn't sound like it's the sort of thing that would have been viable in an earlier era. But is it more plausible now? Because the voters' aperture is just wider for a different kind of candidate. And the premium is yes. Who can break through? Who can get the public's attention, grab them by the lapels? And if anything Rahm Emanuel is capable of, it's getting people's attention with a pithy line or two.
John, one of the things you say that's interesting, just a couple of moments left, but you say this could be the year of a perfect storm for him.
Yeah, look, it's a long ways away. And this is the challenge, right? 2025, it does seem like the Rahm Emanuel persona could be viable. Is that the same case in 2027 or 2028? Or is it going to be fighting the last war by then? Keep in mind, speaking of Chicagoland, not a lot of folks in March of 2005 in the rest of the country were thinking Barack Hussein Obama is going to ride to the rescue of Democrats in 2008. So we're a long ways away from 2028. But I will predict this: Rahm Emanuel is not going anywhere. He's going to be a force on the political landscape. And I think if there's a Democrat in the White House again in 2029, he will or she will give a prominent role to Rahm Emanuel, or that person themselves will be Rahm Emanuel.
David Axelrod once said, when you run for office, you win or lose. When you run for presidency, however, you're sort of elevating yourself. Is it your view that if not presidency, he's potentially looking for something else? Caitlin Collins asked him about your article this week. He said, when I have something to say, I'll say it.
Yeah, he's trying to dodge now because it's so soon. He doesn't want to engage on this. But yeah, absolutely. Look, Rahm Emanuel ending his career in March of 26, losing an Illinois Senate primary would be devastating, right? He couldn't sleep for a year if that happened. It's a very different story if you compete and lose in a presidential race, but elevate your profile and your stature, and you wind up being Secretary of State instead of Secretary of Commerce, right? That's a long-term win for a short-term loss. And I think that is certainly on Rahm's mind, that the risk of losing for Senate or waiting for JB to ever leave the governorship, who needs it when you can run for president and still win for losing by getting a really plum cabinet gig for the next Democratic president?
John Martin of Politico, you've got a lot of people talking around the country. You certainly have people talking here in Chicagoland. Thank you for a great article. Let's stay in touch. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. One more break. We're going to be back with a look at the week ahead after this. Stay with us.